We're going to go back to Psalms tonight. We're in Psalm 64. You want to go ahead and be turning there. Kind of a short psalm. It's a psalm that's attributed to David, but that's about all that we can say about it. There's nothing that really gives any detail exactly when this time period is, because some of the things that David discusses, he faced several different times during his kingship of plots against him and things that's going on against him. So it's really difficult to say exactly when this psalm took place, but we can break this up into two sections, verses 1 through 6 of David praying to God and talking about what the wicked is trying to do, and then you have verses 7 through 10 of what God is going to do. So we'll kind of divide that up and talk about it this evening. Starting in verse 1. It says, "Hear my voice, O God, in my meditation. Preserve my life from the fear of the enemy. Hide me from the secret plots of the wicked, from the rebellion of the workers of iniquity, who sharpen their tongue like a sword and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, bitter words. But they may shoot in secret at the blameless. Suddenly they shoot at him and do not fear. They encourage themselves in an evil manner. They talk of laying snares secretly. They say, who will see them? They devise iniquities. We have perfected a shrewd scheme. Both the inward thought and the heart of man are deep." So we see here, starting back in verse 1, David here is asking God to hear his voice in his meditation. He says to preserve my life from the fear of the enemy. A couple of things with this. One, it looks like, and David has always, I believe, had confidence that God is with him. I think there's times he didn't feel as close to God, and he realized that was his fault, and he realized that he had to do something to get back in that right relationship. But I also think when David is praying, I think he's, on a personal level, really trying to get God's attention. It almost like, I started to say as a kid, trying to get attention of their mom when they're on the phone or something. They're always, it's important to them, and they keep calling her name and just really want their attention because it's important to them. But it's about like me when my wife's on the phone and I want to know what they're saying, and she needs to stop right then and tell me, And that's how we are. We want whatever we're going through at the moment, or whatever we want to know at the moment, it's important to us, isn't it? I mean, we want it right then. And I think that's how David approaches a lot of his prayers with God. It's almost like he's saying, here, I know what you're capable of. I know that you're in control of the universe, but at this moment, I really need you to pay attention to me. I really need you to see what I'm going through. I need you to see what I'm facing. And I think that's what he's doing here. But there's one thing that's interesting to me, how he words this. Preserve my life from fear of the enemy. Notice what David didn't say here. Do you notice what he didn't say? He didn't say preserve my life from the enemy. What did he say? From the fear of the enemy. Is there a difference? I think there's a big difference. Think about it. If God could take away our fear of what may happen or what somebody's doing for us, how could that change us? Would it change us? Yeah, I think then if the enemy is not the problem. The fear of the enemy can be the problem. And David knows quite a bit about fear, because you can go back, and the exact Greek word here is that dread. It actually is meaning dread. Just like he knew when he come up on Saul's army, with Goliath, it says they were afraid. What were they doing? What was Saul's army doing when Goliath come out and made the challenge? What were they doing? Did they go out and fight him? Why? They were afraid. They were such afraid they did nothing. And David here, I think he understands what that kind of fear can do, and he's wanting God to save him or help him from the fear of the enemy. I think fear is the ultimate problem. We could go to Psalms 23, where David talks about the shadow of death. He talks about fear of, he talks about what those things can do and how God can keep you from those things. It's about emotion. It's about feeling. And David said, I want you to help me in my meditation. So I don't know if he's saying this out loud to God or he's wanting God to know what he's saying while he's meditating here to God. But he wants the fear took away from that. Because think about it. David always, even as king, he's always going to have enemies, isn't he? So if it's always just about the enemy, then he'll never have any peace. And it's the same thing with us today. If it's all about what somebody's going to do to us or say about us or persecute us or what's going to happen, if it's always the circumstance of what somebody's doing, we'll never see any peace. But if we can take away the fear of that, the fear of living this life and being in this dark world of what people are going to do, if we can take that fear away, then it would allow us to live our lives the way that God wants us to live, wouldn't it? We could live in peace, even in... That's why David says, and I've missed this for a long time, but when he talks about you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies, you know what he's saying? I mean, think about that. He can sit down and eat a meal with all his enemies around there and have peace doing it. That's where we want to be. And I think that's the same thing he's asking God here. The same thing he's alluding to is to take away that fear of the enemy. And if you take away that fear, then I'll be able to function. I can deal with the enemy as long as I'm able to function and do that. It's not just the enemy. Any thoughts about that? That make sense? It may sound like the same thing, but to me it's two totally different things.
I think Paul would say something similar in the New Testament where he had to be prepared to be stoned wherever he went, beaten wherever he went, whatever. It wasn't a matter of can God take care of me through that. There was always going to be some new mob. But like he said in, I guess, 2 Corinthians, had to learn to rely on the God that can raise the dead. You know, I realize you can die any time, but then you come to that realization of, well, no matter what, God's got my back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's where we have to get to. So look at what David's facing here. He's facing the fear of the enemy. And this is a legitimate fear because what David is facing is not a battle. I think David could face a battle. I think David was a pretty fierce warrior, and I think he proved that many times. What he's facing here is something far worse than what that is. Notice what he says. He said, hide me from the secret plots of the wicked, from the rebellion of the workers of iniquity, who sharpen their tongue like a sword and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, their bitter words, that they may shoot in secret at the blameless. Suddenly they shoot at him and do not fear. David is saying it's the words that these individuals are using. They're planning something and they're just talking amongst themselves. He said secretly. I don't know how secretly he is because David knows about it, but he doesn't know everything about it. But they're secretly, and he says it's not that they're just coming out and shooting arrows. You know, think about that. If you were in a battle and you've seen the archers coming and they just shoot arrows in the air towards you, do you have a pretty good shot of stepping out of the way? But what if you don't see that arrow coming? Is it more dangerous? Which is more dangerous, somebody standing out on the battlefield shooting at you or a sniper shooting at you? Which would be more dangerous? I would think a sniper, you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know when it's coming. You just know it's coming. But David is saying that's what they're going to do. I don't know when this secret plot's going to happen. I don't know when they're going to say these words and do this. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know when it's coming. I just know it's coming. And he says that's the problem because of what they're going to do. There's more done to move the masses with words than there is anything else, isn't there? I mean, think about, just say, I don't know that this is when this is, but if it was when Absalom, come up with his big coup against him, you notice how he did it? By moving the masses. What did Absalom do? He went to the gate, started talking to the people. My dad may not care about you. He may not care about your problems, but I care about your problems. I'll give you what you want. I'll give you what you need. And before you know it, he had all the people on his side. And he did it with words. He didn't do it with a bow and arrow. You know, he didn't do it with a weapon, he did it with words. That's what he was trying to do. And that's what David is facing here. It may not be that same situation, but he's facing the same thing. And that can do harm, can't it? You know, it's one thing if somebody talks about you, but it's another thing you don't know who it is talking about you, when they're going to do it, and what they're going to say. Can that cause any damage? I think that can cause a lot of damage if you don't know what's going to happen. And we see this all the time. We're going to see this coming up. What do you usually see on TV or hear on the radio close to election time? What do you usually hear? Yeah, mudslinging. You hear all these ads of this candidate talking about how awful this candidate is. This candidate talking about. So we know how important words are. That's how they think that they're going to sway the masses, is with words. And that's what David is facing here. So he's wanting God to take away that fear of the enemy, because that fear it's going to drive him nuts, and he don't know what they're going to do when that arrow comes of those words, because he says they sharpen them like words. He said they're telling lies on, they're going to tell lies on him, they're going to slander him, they're going to talk about it, and people are going to believe that. And he says, I don't know where it's coming from. So it's like an archer up there that's a sniper and just waiting for the right moment to shoot that arrow. And he said it's going to be devastating to him. He says, who sharpen their tongue like a sword. They bend their bows to shoot their arrows. Bitter words. They may shoot in secret at the blameless. Suddenly they shoot in him and do not fear. And here's the thing. He says they're going to do this, and they have no fear or shame. They don't have any problem whatsoever doing it, because they say, they talk of laying snares secretly. They say, who will see them? They devise iniquities. We have perfected a shrewd scheme. So they think, according to David, that they're going to do this so secretly and so wickedly, no one's going to see it coming, no one's going to know who it is, and no one can do anything about it. Now here's the thing. If you do something against David, who also are you doing that to? You're doing it to God. Doing something to David is going against God's plan, isn't it? God has a plan for David, so going against David is going against God's plan, and they have no respect for that. They could care less. They said, who's going to see it? So they don't only think that they can hide it from man, they think they can hide it from God. That's how wicked these individuals are. David said, that's what I'm facing. I'm facing a group of individuals who are amongst themselves. They're whispering, they're talking. They're saying, we got the greatest plan ever was. Who can stop us? We've got a shrewd scheme here. What we have in store, it can't lose. Who's going to know? Who's going to do anything about it? They're just, think about it. Is there people in the world like that today think they can do anything they want to do and get away with it? That it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who it goes against, but we've got to realize when you go against a servant of God, you're going against God. Now, we've got to be careful here. We can't always assume because someone is saying something about us that they're evil. What if what they're saying is true? What if we're doing something to give them ammunition to shoot? What do we do then? So we can't always assume that a person's evil. David's not saying they're evil just because they're going to say something about him. What he's saying is they're saying that, and it's not true because he's not doing what they're saying. And that's where we got to be careful, because sometimes as Christians, we can get in this habit of, it can go into suffering. We think, well, there's blessings in suffering, but are all blessings, is all suffering blessed? I may be suffering because of my own actions. Somebody may be saying something because that's actually what I'm doing. They may say something vile against me because I'm doing something vile. So we've got to make sure all of this is predicated on something. When we start thinking about the wicked and we start thinking about the world and we start thinking about what they're doing, we've got to make sure, okay, if they're doing it against me, what's the reason behind it? Now, they may just say something, we talked about this last week. We've been talking about this quite a bit in the teenage class. But, the world is going to say something about us. But what we've got to do is make it to where the only thing that they can say against us is that we're living for God. There's nothing else for them to say. So David says here that they've got their plans. They said they've perfected it. They said who's going to know, who's going to see them. They talk of laying these snares secretly. Everything they're doing is in secret. Everything they're doing, they're thinking, oh, I'm going to get away with this. He's not going to see it coming. And David is basically saying, I can't live like this. I can't live in fear of what somebody else is going to say or do, because I never know when it's going to come or how it's going to come, but it's going to come. So he's kind of asking, I think, something in wisdom here of, here's what these individuals are planning. I need you to work on my fear of that. Because we're going to see at the end of Psalms here what God's going to do, but the world, the evil world, the dark world is still going to be scheming, aren't they? Until the end, they're still going to keep doing that. It's still going to come. It's about our confidence in God and our peace in God to be able to withstand it and get through it. And I tell you, that's a hard thing. I wish I could tell myself this every day. It's this attitude. It's this motivation. It's this looking at the world through the lens that God wants us to. And if we do, we'll see the world a whole different way. We'll still see that it's darkness. We'll still see that it's evil. We'll still see that there's vile people in it, but we'll see a clear path for us through it. Because we'll see that lighted path and we'll know what to take. What happens is when we get marred up in the weeds in the darkness because we stepped out of the light. But David here, that's what he's dealing with. He's dealing with these individuals who are planning this and scheming this and have no regard for David, much less God, because they ought to know with God appointing David that they're going against God's plans. Any thoughts before we get into what God's going to do? Do we still see this today? Could we pray the same thing to God that David's praying right now? I think so. I think we could. We could see it very easily. You still see that. To me, I think there's a clear dividing line today, to where the world is talking more evil against Christians because they see it as, if you stand up against homosexuality, what's the world say you are? Yeah, homophobe. You're a hater. All you're doing is talking hate. Anything that we stand up and talk against, well, it's nothing but hate speech. It's you're just haters. You're intolerant. And all that is just trying to sway the masses to not think that way, to think that everything's okay. To call evil good and good evil, as Isaiah says. That's all we see today. We're going through the same thing, but we can't give in to that. We have to stay true to what we're doing because we don't want to step out of that light into the darkness. We want to make sure that we're doing exactly what God says for us to do. Look, starting here now in verse 7. It says, "But God shall shoot at them with an arrow. Suddenly they shall be wounded, so he will make them stumble over their own tongue. All who see them shall flee away. All men shall fear, and shall declare the work of God, for they shall wisely consider his doing. The righteous shall be glad in the Lord and trust in him, and all the upright in heart shall glory." So notice what he starts out here. And we're going to kind of look at this as compared to what David said that the wicked was doing. It says, "But God shall shoot at them with an arrow. Suddenly they shall be wounded." So what did he say that the wicked were going to do? Remember what he said they were going to do? He said, "Preserve my life from fear of the enemy. Hide me from the secret plots of the wicked, from the rebellion of the workers of iniquity, who sharpen their tongue like a sword, bend their bows to shoot their arrows, their bitter words they shoot in secret and are blameless." And they're saying, who's going to see? So they're planning this attack. So now it says God's going to shoot an arrow and wound them. All the planning that they do, all the disguise that they do, all the secret planning, all the schemes, all the confidence that they had, God's going to stop it with one arrow. God can. I mean, he created the universe, but he doesn't need an elaborate plan, does he? I mean, David even said at one point, what was it? Was it Psalms 2 when it talked about how the kings and all the world plot against God, and God just basically looks at them and laughs. Like, what are you going to do? You can come up with all these plans. You can't fight against God. And that's what he does here. So David is saying, here's what you need to do, God. And it says, what does God do? God shoots an arrow and he wounds them. You know, it don't take much for God to do it. It's almost like if a mosquito comes up and starts biting you, you may not pay attention to it, but when you do, all it takes is one swipe. It's gone, isn't it? That's all God does. You get God's attention like that, it don't take but one swipe. So God here, all he does, it says, but God shall shoot at them with an arrow suddenly, they shall be wounded. And I like how he says suddenly here, because I think they're probably going to be stunned when God puts a stop to their scheme, and they think, well, how did I go wrong? You know, we had all this planned out to do. We had all this worked out. They said, matter of fact, they said it was perfect. They had a perfect scheme, a shrewd scheme. And God just makes nothing of it. But I like what God does, that David says he does in order to do that. Notice what he says, verse 8. So he will make them stumble over their own tongue. All who see them shall flee away. All men shall fear. So everything that they were doing, they were planning secretly. And what does God do? Everything he does openly. He's taking what they were going to do and reversing it and turning it right around on them. He said he's going to make their tongues that they're sharpening, so he will make them stumble over their own tongue. All who see them shall flee away. He says, here you're planning all of this in secret. He said, I'm going to make you stumble on the very words that you're going to say. I'm going to turn it right back on you, and the whole world's going to see, and they're just going to shake their head. They're just going to be in astonishment on what's happening here. I think it's just interesting how God's doing this. It's like he's turning it around, reversing it on, okay, here's what you've got planned. I'm going to turn around on you to where what you've got planned is going to actually be harmful to you. It's actually going to come back on you. And that's how God works, isn't it? When God does something, he does it openly to where the world can see. Because notice what he says here. He says, all men shall fear and shall declare the work of God. For they shall wisely consider his doing. So he says here, God's actually doing this for two reasons, but he always does it for one main reason. He's doing it two reasons because he's protecting. He's protecting David. He's protecting his own. But he's actually doing this for the reason he always does it. What's that? Show him he's God, to bring glory to him. He's turning this around on them to bring glory on himself, so those that can see will see that it's God. He leaves no doubt that he's doing that. And this is interesting because everything that they're doing here, they're wanting to do it in secretly, but everything that God's doing, he's doing it openly, and he's reversing it. And that's how God's always done it. You think back to the very beginning when with Adam and Eve, Satan thought he won there, didn't he? He thought he won, but ultimately it got reversed, and God delivered a huge blow to him when? Remember how he turned it around? Chris talked about it Sunday night. Greatest event in the world. The resurrection. You know, he thought he won because with Adam and Eve, with their sin, what got brought into the world? Death did. So Satan had a field day. Satan thought that he won that. God reversed that, and who conquered death? Jesus did through his resurrection. As Chris said, if it wasn't for the resurrection, none of this other stuff would have mattered. So God did the same thing there as he's always done, as he's doing right here. He's reversing what Satan ultimately wants to do, because these people, whether they realize it or not, whether people today in the world realize it or not, they're just a tool of Satan. So God is taking what Satan thought he had a victory and bringing a crushing blow by reversing what he did.
God seems to like doing that. I mean, I don't know if it's but I mean, you think of Goliath. How was Goliath's head cut off?
Yeah.
With his own sword.
With his own sword.
What's Haman hanged on?
With the very scaffolding he made for, that's one point I was going to make with Mordecai. He made a scaffold to hang him on, but who got hung on it? He did. Nebuchadnezzar with Israel, look what he did. Daniel in the lion's den. the very ones that told on Daniel was the very ones the lions feasted on, if you remember. So, and you start thinking about how God works all of this and how he turns this around. It's I don't want to say it's comical, but it really shows the power of God. God is showing them, I'll show you how powerful I am. I'll take the very thing that you're using and I'll use it against you. I'll take the very thing that's going to be your demise is the very thing that you're planning to be the demise of others. And there's event after event. And he does it to glorify God, doesn't he? You think about what took place before each of these events. It's about, okay, I'm going to destroy, just like Haman wanted to do, I'm going to destroy Israel here, and look what he ultimately did. You look at Daniel in the lion's den, you look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you look at Goliath, as he said. After each of those events, you have individuals that were praising God after that. That they were, against God, but then they're doing it because what God does is to bring glory to him. You take Elijah on Mount Carmel. Remember when everything he does is to prove that he's God. Remember when they were making the burnt offerings and everything, they put the wood on there. And remember when Elijah said, well, maybe your God's asleep, maybe he's on vacation. He kind of mocked them there for a little while. But when it became his turn, using the same thing that they were going to use, he put all the wood, poured water over it, put a ditch around it, had so much water on it, wasn't no way that thing could burn. God burned it like it was nothing. I mean, it wasn't anything. He used that very thing to show I'm God. And he did it, and I thought Chris did an excellent job Sunday night of bringing out of all the points that happened for the resurrection, for it to be open to where there was no doubt that's what God did. I think he did that with Lazarus too, because he came out, he waited till he was stinking. He didn't just say, oh, he took a nap for a little while. He waited till he was stinking. He was still wrapped in the very things that they did when he come out of the tomb there. God always proves that he's God, and man is no match for him. But yet Satan tries again and again and again, and what he tries and I think gets us to do, and I think that's where David is praying to God to get him out of that mindset, is we forget. We may not know how much longer is on the clock in the game, but we know how the game's going to end. And we forget that sometimes. We forget that the victory is God's. So it doesn't matter what Satan tries to do in the meantime, as long as we understand the victory is God's, and I want to be on that side. That's the side I want to be on. That's how you take away the fear of what the enemy's going to do. That's how you take away, that's how you become Paul and be able to stand before kings and preach about righteousness and judgment and self-control. That's how you can become Peter from being afraid in the water to standing up on the day of Pentecost and preaching that great sermon. That's how you see all of these individuals, these great Bible characters throughout history. That's how you see them get to the point that they're at. At some point, you've got to take out the fear of what the world can do. And that's what the Bible says. Don't fear him who can kill the body. Who are we supposed to fear? Yeah, body and soul. So killing the body is nothing. That ain't nothing. What comes after that? We should know what comes after that. So we shouldn't think, well, what if they do this to me? Well, what if they do? We don't want to think that death is no big deal, but that's the whole purpose of the resurrection, wouldn't it? To prove that he conquered that. And David in Psalms 23, that's what he focused on. The shadow of the valley of death. He said you're going to lead me. The shadow of something is different than the actual thing, isn't it? It's not what it's intended to be. So with God, he says he's going to take us through something that's different. Death's not the same for us as it is for somebody else, because we know what's coming. And that's not something that we should dread. That's not something that we should fear. But God takes these, like He's done every other instance that we see throughout, and He reverses what they're doing, turns it against them, lets everybody see it, not only protects his own, but brings glory to Him. And once again, as David always points out, there's a sense of satisfaction in that. There's a sense of vindication in that, because there's a sense of peace to where I can face it with my head hung high. There's nothing that you can do. You can threaten me with a furnace. You can threaten me with lions. You can threaten me with in prison. You can threaten me with beheaded. You can threaten me with anything you want to, but that's not going to stop me from serving God. I'm still going to serve God. So what's man going to do? I mean, what can they do when it comes to that point? Can they do anything? If they can't make you, fear is what they're trying to do. If you take away the fear of that and see that glory of God, then it changes things quite a bit. It says the righteousness, verse 10, the righteousness shall be glad in the Lord and trust in Him, and all the upright in heart shall glory. So he shows here the righteous shall be glad in the Lord. So once the righteous, and that's a person living right living, that's living toward God, that can see this, then we not only glorify God, but we can notice what he says here. The righteous shall be glad in the Lord. I'm be glad in the Lord to see what He's doing, what He's able to do. He's a lot stronger than what our enemies is. He's stronger than any words that they can say. Now, David doesn't underestimate what they're able to do, but most importantly, he don't underestimate what God's able to do. And I think when we get to that point, that's where it really matters. Any thoughts on that? Wait a minute. Bill first. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely, he does. And how he does it, again, like we're saying, he lives no doubt. And I think to a sense, and that's the way he does his people sometimes, like he did the children of Israel, he didn't lead them right into the promised land, led them right to the Red Sea where they looked like they were trapped. He gets a person to a point where they think sometimes with his people, he gets to a point where I don't know what we're going to do, so we can have total trust in him. But he also can get the enemy to where they get pretty confident and think, oh, I've won, and then he just swats them like a gnat, and and they find out that they didn't. Judy, do you have something?
It reminds me of what we talked about karma with people when something happens to us, then we kind of hope the karma's going to come back. To me, that's what
Mm-hmm.
it's asking for.
I think that's probably where that come from, actually, yeah.
Because it's like, I know that they can do this to me, but I know what you can do back to them, and it's kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, the examples of, who killed when the lion's den and
Mm-hmm.
Shadrach, they all ended up having their fate, and most of these people who were trying to kill David ended up with the fate that they were trying to put on him. So
Oh, yeah.
God's our karma.
Oh, yeah.
Gives it back to them, and we need to appreciate when that happens, or if it happens, and give God that glory. It's not anything I did. It's about what God does.
And I think that should show us, why would we need to retaliate? Why would we need to go evil for evil? We can't even compare to what God can do to them. So why would we even, our feeble attempt, what are we actually accomplishing? We're not accomplishing anything anyway. Right? Did you have something, or you just, oh.
And I think it also it gives stronger meaning when God says, "Vengeance is mine." And so I guess I ask the question: why do we get so worked up when we see somebody that we know? I mean, and they're prospering, and the first one comes, Joel Osteen, that's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, why get upset about that? Other than he's
Oh yeah, you think all the way up to the day of judgment. What worse thing can you hear than depart from me, I never knew you? I mean, there's nothing worse than that, you know, and God can ultimately do it. Did you?
Oh, I was
Some,
going to say, you were talking about the resurrection, the way that kind of flips everything. I was thinking of Hebrews 11 at the end, where it talks about the hall of faith, and then it talks about those that didn't get released, they accepted scourgings and beatings, all this stuff. And I think the language it uses that they may receive a better resurrection. And I think it goes back to the glory of God. Some of those first century Christians, the last time eyes were laid on them, people saw them getting sawed in half, eaten by lions. And on the last day when God raised them up from the dead, it's a better resurrection. It's like, how did God put that person back together? But you know,
yeah.
God always, even in the harshest of our sufferings, God always gets the most glory at the end. He reverses it in the bad direction, but he also reverses it in our direction. He turns our suffering into joy. You know,
Yeah.
the reversal works.
Yeah, I mean, can you think? Can you just imagine Day of Judgment? What the ones who did that to them, and then see them there, them behind God, just grinning. I mean, I'm not trying to make light of it, but it's going to be a glorious time. I mean, it really is because of what we suffer, and we can't by any means do what God does. And again, not to make light of it, but with the style that God does it. I mean, the way God does it, he doesn't leave any doubt, and he turns it right back on these individuals, and he does it out in the open so they can't secretly do anything anyway. God's going to expose it. So, and David, as you see him progressing like he normally does, he starts out, you know, hear my cry, O God, and take me from the fear of this. Here's what they're going to do, but here's what you're going to do. And then at the end, we're glad and glorified. It doesn't mean that these people aren't going to do it anymore. God's going to handle it. It just means how we're going to perceive it, knowing that God's going to. And I think that we can face anything that we face totally different than anything else. And I mean, words hurt. We see that, and that's what David's facing. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's always going to be there. Jesus said they're going to hate you because they hated me first. You know, you look at what they done to Jesus, and you see things that's done to us. It's because the path that we're on. So it's going to come. We can't just say, God, just put a stop to all of it. Just help us to be able to deal with it, knowing how you're going to deal with it. And again, that can bring us the peace and just the peace and the happiness and joy, I guess, that we need to get through this life. And that's how we have the abundant life that he wants us to have. Any final thoughts on this psalm?
You know, you were saying a while ago, mentioned a while ago, and Judy referred to karma. I think about the boxer Muhammad Ali, that big mouth and the braggart. His last 10, 15 years on this planet, he couldn't speak anymore. He lost that voice and that arrogance, and he became a crippled shell of a man. He was no longer a heavyweight champion of the world, who, by the way, wouldn't fight for his country and such. But you know, you think about, I don't know what transpired there, but I wonder what went through his mind when he decided he was going to cast off, become a Muslim, and all these great things he was going to do. His last 15 years or so of life,
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that had the torture that had to be for him. Because he was a proud man.
You think about all, and we don't, I don't think we give, because we do say karma, or we do say luck, or whatever it may be, and we don't give, God the credit for a lot of things, because quite honestly, we can't prove here or there sometimes what he's doing. We just need to know what he's able to do, and who knows, that may very well be God doing that. Of course, we know what he's going to do in the ultimate judgment, but God's still at work in life. David believed God was going to do something for him then. He wasn't just saying, I know in the future it's all going to work out. He says, this is what he's going to do to my enemies. David, I think anything that went against his enemies, there wasn't no doubt in his mind that was God. And what's wrong with that? What's wrong with saying, okay, that's God, punishing them. That's God, chastising us. That's God, That's why I've tried to learn not to get real excited about what candidates in what position, because one or two things, how do you know it's because of all the evilness, and it is, that it's God putting them there because of where it's getting. God's used a lot of evil people to do a lot of things to chastise His own. So it's all about learning to live in the world that we're in and doing the best that we can with the world that we're in, around, of the light that we're able to shine. And sometimes it's hard to do that because there's so much mudslinging, there's so much words being said, so much things out there that we get bogged down in that we get in that same category and think, well, I've got to do this. Well, I can't do it as good as God can, so why? The best way for me to go against that is live the best life that I can. That's how you stop those words.